Welcome everybody to the Sauce Builder webinar. I'm Beth Kaiser from Sauce Labs, and I'm here with Adam Christian. Sorry for the technical difficulties. We will get started right away. Here's Adam.
Hello everyone. Today we're going to do the Builder webinar. The goal of this is to get everybody up and running with a test in less than 30 minutes. We're going to go for about 45 minutes because there's about 15 minutes of additional information I want to give you guys to help you get going here. So I'm a JavaScript architect here at Sauce Labs, and I've been working on the Builder project for about 3 months. And we did a release recently, and we're pretty excited about it. So before we dive into it, there's some definitions, some things I'm going to say that everyone should know what I'm talking about. So the first one is there's a little bit of name confusion. There's a bunch of different products here involved, and I want to make sure that everybody's pretty clear on those. So Selenium IDE is the traditional IDE for building Selenium tests. Selenium Builder is the open source project for Builder, and that is on Google Code, and anybody can contribute or download that. Sauce Builder is it's a version of Selenium Builder with some built-in support for Sauce Labs, and going forward, Sauce integration is going to be part of a plugin architecture. Sorry if you can't hear me, I'll try to speak up. And the next bit of the puzzle is called Test Runner, and that is a online project for uploading your HTML-based Selenium tests and allowing you to schedule those and run those. Can everybody hear me? I'm going to wait a second and see. That's worse? If you can hear me, if you could chime in on the questions there, that'd be helpful. It's hard to know. All right? Okay, sounds good. Thanks. And one other thing that you guys will hear me say occasionally is DOM, and that stands for the Document Object Model, which is sort of the basis for how a web page is designed. A web page is basically a bunch of boxes, sort of with different margins and padding, and it's important for writing a test to know what your tests are actually doing and how the locators work. So the goals of the Builder project was to take what everybody loves about a Selenium test creating IDE and make the interface a little bit more friendly. We did a bunch of user testing here and have worked really hard on making it intuitive. We've tried to give you as much feedback and suggestions while you're building a test as we possibly can. It's kind of hard to build a test that works really well against a web page, and so the more that you can learn about what's happening, the better you can do. We wanted to make it really fast to create a test because when you have a new feature, you want to get that test written, you want to get it up. And we wanted easy integration with other services. Obviously Sauce Labs is the first one, and with our upcoming plugin architecture, we'd like it to have integration with lots of different things. And the other thing is that Selenium IDE is built in the Mozilla-specific Zool interface, and people are really used to using web technology, so we wanted to use CSS and JavaScript and build something that felt like a web page. And the last thing is that we wanted to build a thriving community, and so we're really trying to get everyone as involved as we can on Google Code. So in terms of features, the main feature that we're going to be working with is the recording feature. And in addition to that, there's a lot of step-by-step debugging, exporting and importing into, from different languages, and the ability to create suites. Also, part of the Builder UI is suggestions for different locators that you may want to use. So really quick, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the DOM. The way that works is it's a big tree data structure. You have boxes inside of boxes inside of boxes. And since those are all styled, you can access them in 3 different ways. The one we recommend the most is an attribute that you can rely on, normally an ID or an automation name or a name property, which usually needs to be put there by your developers. So if they know you're going to be automating the product, you want to encourage your developers to give you a way to access them. If that isn't the case, you can use CSS selectors. And lastly, we don't recommend it, but you can always use XPath. One thing you have to remember with locators, and probably the biggest pitfall of building tests, is that each of these locators doesn't work exactly the same in each browser. So for example, the reason people have frustrations with XPath is that the way that Internet Explorer and the other browser rendering engines don't actually build the DOM tree the exact same way, which is why you need cross-browser, so that you can see if that works the same way. So I'm going to give you guys a little example of how to use Firebug, and I would suggest that if you haven't played with it, that you should give it a try, and it'll help you understand how the web page is laid out. So after installing Firebug, I'm going to navigate to a web page that I use, codepad.org, which is a pretty simple web app, and you can see the box model there. So in the HTML tab, you'll see that there's the main HTML tag, which is the outside, the head, and the body. The body is where most of the content is. Inside that, you'll see various elements and some script tags. So a div is simply a box, and that's the main div, and you can see that it's got a style property there. We've got a margin of 8 pixels, so that just puts the space on each side of it. And then inside of that, there's a table. So as I mouse around the page, this is going to it's going to show me where this lies in the DOM tree. So if you see up here, there's a whole bunch of tags there, and this is actually the XPath starting from the very base of the page. You have the body, and then a div, and then a center, and then a table, etc., etc. So you can see how easy it would be to make one change to your web app and break your XPath locator. Firebug is great because it'll show you all of the different CSS that's being inherited by the node, and you can walk through and see various attributes on it. So if you have a locator that's breaking, a really easy way to debug that is to bring up your web page, bring up Firebug, and find that DOM node and look at the different properties and see if the XPath is the same, or if you're using an attribute or CSS, if that's changed since the last time you worked on the test. So I'm going to head back to the presentation here. So the first bit that I'm going to show you is about recording. A couple things to keep in mind when you're recording a new test. That is to be mindful of clicks. So everything that you click on is going to become part of your test. And if you really don't want it to be part of your test, just don't click it, because the more actions you have, the slower your test is actually going to run. And remember that it's a first pass and nothing is set in stone. So don't be worried if you click on various other things. It's not a big deal, but you just need to remember to go back through and remove those. And recording is great because it gives you a little speed, and it helps you build a test that would normally take much longer if you're writing code. So how we get there is we launch Selenium Builder from the Tools menu. You can download this on Mozilla add-ons, or you can go directly to the Google Code project and download the XPI. We click Start Recording, and now as we're interacting with the page, we're going to get a script developing over here on the right side for each of the things we're doing. Now, in addition to recording, you can also dynamically generate verifications, which is really useful. And this is one of my favorite features because generating a verification is simply a point and click. You can see that the interface is simply built out of JavaScript, so it feels very web pagey. So I'm gonna record a couple more actions here, just so we have something to work with, and then I'm gonna move on to making this a little bit more robust. So one of the really useful bits of this is that you have local playback. So as much editing and changing as you want to do, you can keep running it over and over and over locally and seeing how those changes have manifested. So the next slide, beefing it up. So a lot of people generate asserts and verifications, and those are great. But in Selenium 1 specifically, they can be a big problem because if you do an assertion while a page is trying to load, you're going to get an error, and the error is not actually going to be pointing out a real bug. Timing is a really frustrating part of automation, so I'm going to show you real quick how to remove asserts and verifies or adding a step before them for a wait just to make the test dynamic. It also helps your test run a little bit faster. I also want to remove any unnecessary clicks, interacting with things that aren't actually necessary to the path of my test. And then I'll show you real quick how you can go through the different locator choices that we've generated and what's all available in the editing menus. So if you see here, I click on the name submit, and then I have a wait for page load. And those are automatically generated just so that when you record this and play it back, your test should work. But that's a little bit unnecessary because the next step is to verify that this string print testing is on the page. And instead of doing a wait for page load, we can just wait for that element and then we can interact with it. So I'm going to delete wait for page load. And then I'm going to go run this test, but I didn't add any other weights in, so we can kind of expect this to fail. So the next step that I want to do is I'm going to turn this verify into a wait, and doing that's really easy. You simply click on the action name, and you get to this editing menu, and you'll see that there's 5 little radio buttons, and each of those is representing a different set of actions in the Selenium API. So right now we're on the assertion API, and I'm simply going to go over to the wait for condition API, and then you see that automatically selected is wait for text present, which is actually what we want. So I'm going to rerun this test locally, and off we go. So I'm going to go through and remove the other weights here. And you'll see when I run these on the cloud and against Selenium Server that it's actually really nice to have these tests be dynamic because depending on how long it takes for elements to show up in the DOM, your test can run really fast or slower, but you definitely don't want it breaking unnecessarily. If you want to add something to your test after the fact, there's this menu on the left side where you can insert a new step above or below it. You can drag that around in the list, and then I'll show you here. You can pick the method you want, and then by clicking on the locator, you can use some of our functionality to. So here we go. I'm gonna copy the XPath for the next thing we're going to interact with. I'm going to put it in as the locator for this, and now we're going to wait to do anything at that point until this XPath shows up on the page. Okay. It's actually really malleable. So find a different locator will allow you to mouse over, move around the page, and as that's happening, we're updating the different targets, and we'll generate an XPath there, but I'm going to delete that. So let's see, we'll delete this last wait, and this will probably break. Okay. Turn this to a wait, and I think we're ready. Okay, nice and dynamic. So I'll head back over to my slides here. So the next thing we're going to do is we've run this test locally. We've done a little bit of debugging. The next thing we want to do is, if we make a whole bunch of changes, it's nice to be able to step through the different bits and see which actions are working and which ones are failing. So part of that menu is the ability to play one test at a time, and then you can also start running from any place in your script. So I'll show that real quick. Okay, so I'm going to step through these, and I'm going to run them one step at a time. I'll actually answer this one question while we're going. It was that why is XPath used as a default instead of CSS? Because it's brittle. And the answer is that it's not actually a default. We try and validate everything else that we can use first. And if the CSS locator that we are able to generate is not working reliably, if there is not an attribute, we fall back to XPath. So actually, when you see XPath in your script, it's a really good indicator to you that you may want to bust out Firebug and talk to your developers and see if you can find a little bit more reliable way to access that. So you'll see in my script that I'm going to go through and make some changes. And it's really useful to be able to edit this stuff inline, because you simply click on what you want to make a change to, and the editing UI comes up. So after you've stepped through your test, you made your changes, and it works the way you want, you may want to run it in against your local Selenium RC. Before you start running it on the Sauce Labs cloud or any other infrastructure, you want to make sure it runs in as many browsers locally as you can, because that's the fastest and the cheapest way to do it. So I'll show you real quick how to export this test and run it against Selenium RC. Actually, we won't be exporting the test yet, but we can run it directly on against Selenium RC from within the UI. So I'm going to run this test again locally to make sure this works. This is a slightly shorter test against saucelabs.com. So I had the Selenium server here running, so I'm gonna kill this and start it from scratch. You can see. So I simply went to Selenium HQ. And I downloaded the latest Selenium server standalone.jar. And the way that you run that from the command line is just java-jar. Sys will bring up the server. Nice thing about the Selenium 2 jars is they also have built-in support for WebDriver. So you can run your legacy tests, and you can also run any WebDriver tests if you've built those. So the Selenium server is running on localhost, port 4444, and if you have any experience with Selenium, you'll know that there's a handful of different browser strings you can use to specify what browser you want to run in. And so this example, I'm going to use Google Chrome. So I typed in star Google Chrome and I hit run. So obviously you'll see that Selenium server pops up a new instance of Google Chrome, and now our test is running. So while that's going, I'll try to answer a couple more of these questions. So the CSS locators are very similar to Sizzle. We actually aren't using the Sizzle engine yet. We're using CSS query, but we're going to be moving over to Sizzle, and the syntax should be transparent. So we ran against Selenium RC, and that worked great. You can go back into that menu. You can change it to Firefox, or if you're on Windows, you can do IE and Safari. So real quick, I'm going to switch over and I'm going to show you guys Sauce Builder. So I'll talk about that a little bit more before I jump into that. So the only difference here is that Sauce Builder is Selenium Builder with one extra JavaScript file, and that JavaScript file simply uses jQuery's dialogues UI to pop up a little UI allowing you to sign up for an account or enter your current account information, and that Selenium RC option simply becomes a Sauce on Demand option. And the only difference there is that instead of sending a single string, which is the browser name, as the browser string, we're sending a JSON data structure that has your browser string, but also your username and API key. So I'll actually. So the Sauce on Demand option allows you to run on the cloud, and what that means is that we offer a whole lot of different browser and operating system combinations. The really nice thing about that is that you don't have to run your own infrastructure. So as soon as Firefox 4 came out and IE9 came out, we added a new browser string to the Sauce Labs cloud, and we could offer your tests immediately able to run on those. But one thing you have to keep in mind is if you're running your tests in browsers that you don't have locally, you don't have the IDE there for doing debugging. So you're going to be spending money running those tests on the cloud, and if you have fragile XPaths, those will break, and that can be pretty frustrating. On the plus side, the Sauce on Demand service records a video of the test run and screenshots along the way, and we also have a log where we analyze each of the actions and try to give you some feedback on why they may have broken. So we try to do as much as we can to help you debug something that's not immediately in front of you. Okay, so I'm going to run this test again locally just to make sure it's still working. Nothing's changed on my target page. I apologize if you can't hear me. I'm trying to talk as loud as I possibly can into this giant microphone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this test out. I'm actually going to go back and talk about this here a little bit. So to save a test out, you simply go to the script menu. Actually, if you downloaded Selenium Builder today, I made some changes last night and deployed a new version. And this script menu is now File, because a lot of people are getting confused. Everyone's used to File, apparently. So it'll be File, Save to Disk, and that'll bring up a nice little menu. Okay, so since I've saved this file before, which you won't your first time, you can write over the last one. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this out as a new HTML Celanese script. This is sort of the common import-export format. So then I'm going to close out of Selenium Builder, and I'm going to go back to my Tools menu and go to Launch Sauce Builder. You can have both installed together, and it's not a problem at all. So I'm going to open that HTML file. And we're in this familiar UI, so pretty much everything should be the same. And I'm going to go back to that Run menu, but instead of run on Selenium RC, we'll back up a little bit. There's a run on sauce on demand option. So we'll get there. Boom. So we click run on sauce on demand, and this is going to give you all of the combinations of different browser and operating system combinations that Sauce Labs supports. So you can scroll through this list and pick one of those pesky IE browsers. Whatever you saved your test out is automatically going to be the test run name, so you can change that. You can set a timeout duration, and you can decide whether or not you want to record video, because it actually does add a few seconds per action. So if you're really focused on speed, you may want to uncheck that. And then we also support user extensions. So if you have a web accessible user extension, you can stick the URL in there, and we're going to automatically add that to your Selenium profile. So when I hit go, we're going to say, do you have a Sauce Labs account? For the sake of this demo, I'm going to say no. If you do, it'll be 2 fields, and you can just enter in your username and your API key. So I'm going to put in my Sauce Labs account information here, all 4 fields. And then I'm going to click on sign up. And if there's no issues with that information, we're just going to go ahead and create your account and immediately run your test on the cloud. So it takes us about sometimes 10 to 15 seconds to spin up a new fresh VM for you. We'll start running the test. I didn't do any magic here to make this look faster. That's about how long it'll usually take. So you'll see there is a live VNC session of your test actually running one command at a time in IE. So once your test is done running, speed up here. Once your test is running, you get this job summary page, and this has access to the video. Has a little summary on if you passed in any context data, and information on each of the actions that you ran and whether they were successful or not. And at the bottom, you get a screenshot of the last action in the test, so you can see if there's an issue there. So we record this video and we make it public. We don't make it public, but you have the option to make it public. And you can also download this and send it around if it demonstrates a bug or something, which people tend to find pretty useful. Okay, you guys saw that run. You can also go to the Selenium server log, and you can actually see the output of each of those actions. And in between each of, well, not each, but many of them, we do a capture screenshot, so you can actually see that we're saving an image there. Okay, so you can go back to this menu, and you can select as many of these as you want. You get the idea. You can pretty much go through and run this test on all the different browsers that you want. So I'm going to head over back to my slides and move on here. So if you don't want to run directly against the local Selenium server from the IDE, you do have a couple options, and people really like these for running their tests in a continuous integration environment. The first one is that you can export to a script that will run it against your local Selenium RC. You can also export to a programming language that has Sauce Labs stuff built into it, so you can run it as a programming language but against the Sauce Labs cloud. You can always export as HTML and HTML suites, as those are a common format for importing and exporting out of the IDE. And then I'm going to show you Test Runner, which is a service that allows you to upload your HTML tests and run that in parallel against as many browsers and operating systems as you want from one really nice UI. So we'll pop over to demo number 7 here. So as always, I'm going to run this again locally just to make sure that everything's passing. Know what to expect. And then I'm going to export this. So since I'm pretty comfortable with Python, I'm going to select Python from this list. It's going to ask me where my Selenium RC is and what browser I want this test to be running against by default. So I'm going to save that as webinar.py, and then I'm going to head over to my trusty terminal to run this from the command line. So you can see here that webinar.py is simply a Python script. It imports the Selenium client driver, which I have installed, and it just sends these different commands over to the Selenium RC server. So to run it, I'm just going to type Python webinar.py, and that should do all of the magic for me. I see all your questions, and I appreciate it. I'm going to stop here in a minute, and I'm going to try to cruise through as many of those as I can. We'll keep going until I feel like I've gone through enough of them. So back to the demos. I'm going to show you guys demo number 8, and this one is actually doing a similar export, but running it on the Sauce Labs cloud. As you'll see next to the standard exporters, there's a save for on-demand option. So I simply click that, and that's going to give me the drop-down list where I can pick my browser and operating system. And when I do that export, it's going to stick all of that information in there so that I don't have to, mess around with manipulating that string. So here's my on-demand script. You'll see that instead of just a browser here, we've got ondemand.saucelabs.com and port 80, which is where our service sits, and then username and access key and browser, etc. So let's fast forward to running this here. So I run that again, Python ondemand.py. If you're a Ruby person or a Java person, if you have the client driver for Selenium installed for your language, you should be able to do something very similar with any of the other languages. So this is going to sit here, and I log into Sauce Labs. I'll see that that script is queued up, and then it starts running, and I can go to the job details, and I can actually go back and get that VNC session. So when it's done, it gives me the results and how long it took. So now for demo number 9, Test Runner. This is a Sauce Labs partner service, and a lot of people have been using it recently, and I've been really happy. So I just wanted to give you guys a quick demo of how that works. So I'm going to export as an HTML script. Just going to call it Test Runner example so that we know what we're doing. So then I'm going to navigate to the Test Runner website. So I've already registered, so I have an account, but you can create a free account, and it sorts you out with your own subdomain there. So since I don't have a suite, I'm just going to upgrade the one test. But you can go into the preferences and make sure it has the correct Sauce Labs information there for you. And then I can go ahead and just import that HTML test. Okay, so simple as that, you can see all of the actions in that test. And so if I hit run, I think it automatically chooses 2 browser combinations for me. But I want more than that. So I'm going to go ahead and see. If I go to the test runner example, no, it's actually in the project menu. So you'll see on the right side there's the different supported browsers. It picked 2 of the 46 available for you, but I'm going to edit that. And you get this really nice grid where you can see all of the different browsers on the different platforms that we support. So I'm going to do Firefox, Safari, IE, and IE9 on Windows 2008. So you simply save and click Run. So I believe that you can actually set up your own infrastructure if you want to use this as well, but Sauce Labs is default configured in there. So this is going to take a few seconds to queue up, and it gives you a nice little status there. So as this starts running, we'll head over to Sauce on Demand. Should be able to see. Yeah, so these last 5 jobs here are what we just queued up. And I'm going to fast forward here, we're running out of time. So you see that this runs, you get to 100%, and then you get this really nice little summary down here of the different browser combinations and the pass rate there. So I'm going to jump back over to my slides. Just really quick, I want to talk about the future because a lot of people have this question. Yeah, there actually is some integrated mobile stuff into test runners. So if you set up your own Selenium farm and you have Selenium 2 has Android support there, you can actually run your tests on some mobile. And Sauce Labs has plans to roll that stuff out too. So you'll definitely see a lot more mobile stuff with Selenium going forward. But the next couple of projects for Builder is integration for Selenium 2, exporting to a WebDriver style API. That's very close on the horizon. And we have an ongoing project on the open source project of a plugin architecture. And the first plugins I'm going to build for that will include the Flex Pilot support and a UI for running lots of tests in parallel. So keep your eyes peeled for those. So now we're at the end. We went over a little bit, but I've got a couple minutes here, 15 minutes for Q&A. So let's get started on those. So one of the first questions was, I'm particularly interested in Selenium 2 and WebDriver. So let me clarify the relationship there. Builder was built when Selenium 2 wasn't really in its awesome current state that it's in now, which is actually pretty close to getting a release. Still in beta though. So we've realized recently that it's really important for people, especially if you do SSL and a lot of iframe, cross-domain sort of stuff, especially in terms of speed. Selenium 2 is going to be really important. So right now we're in development on an exporter for Selenium 2. Once we ship that, we're going to actually go through and add a second mode to the Builder UI, allowing you to actually generate actions in the Selenium 2 API. So you'll be able to mentally shift over to that whole new project if you want to. So another question is there a way to diff the DOM in Firebug or any other tool? And there's a few different ways you can go about this. One of the more successful ways I've seen it done is people actually pull the, using a programming language, they pull down the DOM and they have, when they generate the test, they actually pull down the DOM so they have something to compare to, and in code you can actually do a comparison in the different programming languages. Another way I've seen it done is by doing screenshots, and there are various image libraries that allow you to diff screenshots, and there's integration there you can probably do with Jenkins or another CI system. So another great QA question here. Is there a timer function that tells me how long it took for a wait for X to be satisfied? So the default, I believe, I have to double check in the code, but I think we have a 20-second timeout. You can set the timeout in a couple different ways. There's a built-in Selenium command. going forward with Selenium 2, there's actually a mode there where you can just implicitly wait. That'll be really nice. So in the new UI for Builder, we're probably going to have a checkbox where you can just not deal with waits at all. So another question here, is there a way to integrate Selenium tests with a framework like JUnit and integration tests at the same time? So since you can export these to code, if you saw in the export list, there is a JUnit exporter and a testng exporter for Java. And I don't see any reason why part of your build process couldn't run your integration tests and, ship off your functional tests to your own grid, a Selenium RC running locally on the machine, or to the Sauce Labs cloud. There's actually some pretty great blog posts about this stuff. So if you guys want more detailed information on doing integration with CI and that kind of stuff, feel free to email us and we can connect you up with that. So there's another question. What languages are supported? Can you write the verification in Perl? So at this, excuse me, at the Selenium conference last week, there was a lot of talk about the Selenium 2 Perl drivers. I'll actually pull this up right now and see if, I can't remember if Builder has an exporter for Perl. So yes, there is an exporter built into Builder for Perl. There isn't one for Selenium 2 yet, but I know people are working on that. So one of the questions was, can I make my test dynamic? So for example, if you record against a stage and then you want to change it over to another staging environment, if you export to code, you can have that your programming languages check your environment variables. You can do it that way. Also, Jenkins has plugins for allowing you to do variables in the job. So you could have it, you could set the environment variables that way. In terms of in Builder, probably the best way to do it is to just, if you want to run the test from the UI, is to just bring it up and change it. There isn't any test-driven development, dynamic variable stuff other than the built-in Selenium store vars in Builder. So somebody at 1037 asked, can you run multiple browsers simultaneously? So there's a few ways to do that. One of those is there are libraries for running your test depending on your language in parallel. I know there's one for Selenium, one in Ruby. Python, you can use nose and run multiple threads of your test. And then I showed you Test Runner, which allows you to run HTML tests in parallel. We're continually pushing forward on making that easier. So I would like to see one of the plugin architecture additions to be a UI for allowing you to do that directly from Builder. Somebody asked if I will be at Velocity 2011, and I don't think I will. If somebody wants to send me that information, I will check that out. I will be, however, speaking at JavaScript Conf in Portland and attending NodeConf up there, and probably OSCON and Open Source Bridge. So I'd be happy to talk with any of you there. I see there's a couple mentions of automating Flash apps, and I worked on FlexPilot, which currently has integration with Selenium IDE, and that will be the first thing that I port as soon as the plugin architecture is ready. You said, can we use Selenium Grid instead of RC? That's a great question, and the answer is absolutely yes. I'm imagining that since I haven't done a lot of work with Grid, that you run tests the same way you would with RC. You pass a browser string. And that should work pretty seamlessly because you can stick as much information in there as you want. If for some reason people try that and it doesn't work, please let me know because we are committed to supporting Grid. Someone said, could I briefly discuss the limitations? So right now the limitations are that there aren't any plugins, and we haven't rolled out Selenium 2 exporting yet. The goal of the project initially was simply to help people get up and running faster, but now we see that there's a huge demand for this. We've had around 1,800 downloads of Selenium Builder off of Mozilla AMO, and over 600 active users a day. So that's pretty exciting. So we're going to try to keep building out features. So if you have stuff you want, please go to the open source project and log a ticket. Go back to the WebDriver one. There was a question about somebody using Selenium 2 and WebDriver. Is there early access for Builder that you can try with Java? And the answer is that as soon, hopefully in the next week or two, we're going to have exporters for WebDriver, and I will. There is a Selenium Builder mailing list off of Google Code using Google Groups, and as soon as that is ready in beta checked in, I will send out an email, and I would love it if everybody could give it a try and let me know. There was another question about using mobile Safari or Android simulators to run tests, and I'm hoping that as soon as those are a little bit farther along with Selenium 2, we should be able to make that integrated so you can run against those just like you would any other browser. I think for speed stuff, what you'll see first is probably Android x86 because in VirtualBox because it runs faster. And I hear that's coming soon, so stay tuned. So someone said, can we have all this infrastructure locally? And the answer is absolutely yes. There's a bunch of different ways you can do that. If you want to use the open source version, you can get up your own farm using Grid or something that supports the Selenium protocol. And Builder, it makes HTTP requests to a server. So if you're supporting that protocol, that should work fine. If you want to use the sauce flavored version, all you have to do is make your server accept a JSON string instead of simply a browser string, and you should work. And I'd be happy to answer questions to help people support that API if you want to do it yourself. The use of Firebug at the beginning of the presentation was simply to give you an idea of sort of how the web page is structured, so that you understand that the way locators work is, attributes, CSS, and XPath, and those are simply hung on the DOM objects. And it's really useful for debugging. So if you run into a case where there's an action trying to access something on the page and you can't get it to work, using Firebug is a really great way to figure out why that's not working. So somebody asked if we recommend a cloud provider. So there's a few things you can do. Obviously, Sauce Labs, we offer a cloud service. And we offer 200 free minutes a month, and we offer 1,000 to open source projects. So if you want to use our infrastructure, we would love it. If you want to set up your own grid, you can do that locally on machines at your office, or you can use EC2 instances as part of your grid. And all of this should still work as long as you're speaking the Selenium protocol. Yeah, so we had a question about store in Builder. And the answer is yes, store var should work. We had a couple people talking about that and working on that this week. So if you're trying to use it and it's not working, let me know. And I have a forum page that I can send you on how to use it. Go back to the first one. Oh, so somebody asked if we have considered allowing automation outside of the DOM, toolbars, etc. And in the short term, the answer is no, but with the way Selenium 2 is driving the browser from the trusted space and the work that the Selenium project is doing with Mozilla, with Mosmil, which automates the entire Chrome of Firefox, it's a possibility in the future, and if you wanted to do this infrastructure yourself, you could probably make that happen. But our restrictions are sort of security based, so we want to make sure that people have a solid privacy experience. In terms of property fields or data-driven tests, you're going to need to use the built-in store var stuff. Probably the right answer to that is if you're going to do a lot of data-driven stuff, you should probably export to a programming language and read that stuff in from a database or a file. So somebody said our application only works in IE currently. Does that mean we'll have to write scripts by hand? So this is an interesting question. So obviously you can record your test in Firefox, and a lot of the time, especially if your developers put IDs on or used solid CSS for building the page, that test should hopefully run the same way in Internet Explorer. However, one thing I forgot to mention on the feature slide is that since Builder is based on HTML, CSS, we would really like to see this code base getting ported over to a native IE extension, so you could actually record and run your tests from your IE environment. So stay tuned on that.
Time for one or two more questions.
So in terms of saving out reporting from Builder, that's not there yet. I expect that somebody will probably build that as a plugin, but for right now, we're offloading any kind of reporting to your CI tool or test runner. If you have any other specific use cases, I see some people having issues with recording and various stuff like that. Please email the mailing list and log tickets on the Google Code project. I will show you the URL again here. It's codegoogle.com/p/SEBuilder, and I'd be happy to respond to those. Last question here. Actually, I'll do two more. The second to last is how about running load tests? Sauce Labs mostly focuses on functional, but if you want to, probably the best way to do a load test would be to run your functional test and at the same time using some code to simulate load on the TCP layer. There's a couple other projects like Browser Mob that focus on load testing, but we would like to have a story in the near future on that. And as to the Test Runner Sauce Labs relationship, that's simply a partnership. Test Runner is its own entity. We work really closely with Daniel, and so we're trying to make that a really great experience, and we expect that an early plugin to the Sauce Builder plugin architecture will be the ability to send your tests straight up to Test Runner. So if you have any more detailed questions on that relationship there, feel free to email me, and I can put you in touch with Daniel and John, our CEO here at Sauce Labs. So thanks everybody very much. There's a bunch more questions, but we don't have time for it now, but I'd be happy to answer those offline.
Thank you, everybody. As I mentioned, we have recorded this webinar, and we will post a link on our blog and send you an email when it's available for download.